Hello, my name is Mike Hale, and I'm going to do an intro to schematics using a game called Bally Odds and Evens. And this is a game that I have. And the reason I'm using a Bally game is because, generally speaking, Bally and Williams schematics are available for free. And the Gottlieb games are going to be a little bit more difficult to find the paperwork for those without purchasing it directly from Pinball Resource and Steve Young, since he has the copyrights to those. And I would highly recommend that you do that. I know it's almost like a cliche or standard thing of a response in a lot of the pinball groups online, but in all honesty, without Pinball Resource, with the rare items that they have, if they didn't exist, the pinball community would be out a lot of parts. So even if you're ordering from other places, I'd recommend supporting Pinball Resource. So that's my little pitch. So we have Bally Odds and Evens, and I'm familiar with this game, and it's important, I would think, before you jump into a schematic, if it's your very first game, I think it's important for you to know how that game is designed to be played. It'll just make understanding the schematic a little bit easier, in my opinion. So with that being said, what I'm going to do to start before I actually jump into the schematic is I'm going to show you a picture of the playfield, which pictures of playfield in the schematic I found on Internet Pinball Database online. If you were to search a game, you're probably going to get Pinside and this site as the top two results. And on this site, again, if it's a Bally and Williams, for the most part, you can find them for free by just clicking the link. So let me show you a picture of the playfield. I'll tell you very generically. Actually, let me go back. There's an illuminated playfield. That might be a little bit easier to explain. There we go. All right, so on this game, the main purpose is to light up these lights here. It looks like this game actually is not started yet, or the game's over, and I'll tell you why here very shortly. But the purpose of this game, you see these rollover buttons up here, and you can see I have two of them that are still lit, and that would be the 1 or the 2. So as you hit these rollover buttons up here, it'll light the corresponding light down here. When you light up all of the black ones or all the odds, this hole right here now becomes lit and becomes 5,000 as opposed to 500. When you light up all the evens, which are the reds, this hole up here will do the exact same thing. So basically the gameplay for the most part is you want to keep firing the ball up to the top until you hit those rollover buttons. The other way you can make these lights go out, and this is why I think that this game is off currently, is these lights right here will light up. And if you're playing and you're hitting certain things, I think it's 10-point bumpers. It's what rotates the match unit, actually, I know that, and we'll get into that in a second. These lights will cycle, and they'll rotate back and rotate back. So let's just say that this one light is lit up, and I hit this kick out hole. I will not only get whatever the value is, it'd be 500, but it would also light up that light. And same thing up here. So you can either light up the lights by hitting here, or whatever light is lit up when you hit the corresponding hole. So the purpose, once again, light these up. Once you get them all lit up, and all of them actually, this little gate will open and you can get a free ball or free game. There's a setting you can change for this game. And then these become 5,000 points as opposed to 500. So the rest of the game, for the most part, you're trying to fire. This one's a little bit easier for this game in that hole and just rack up 5,000 points. And also you'll notice it says up post, and this says up post. So this will make the post go up. So it'll block the center drain. You usually lose the balls down here in this game anyway, but there's also these down post rollovers. So if you hit one of those, this post will go down. So that's basically the game. You want to knock these out, light these up, and then for the rest of the game, you're trying to shoot into these holes to rack up as much points as possible. These lights down here are functioned by trip relays, which might be a little confusing, but I think it's important to note when we jump into the schematic that I hit this rollover button. So let's say, I don't know, let's say this is the 2, okay? This lights up because what it'll do in the machine is it'll energize a trip relay just for a moment. It releases a spring-loaded stack of switches, which will now change state. So they'll either be on or off depending on how they're stacked in that relay. Okay, so It's not as though a relay is being held constantly when you hit these lights that light up. It trips it, they're spring loaded, and then they're being held by the spring to save the coil. Okay, so that's the game. Let's get back to the schematic to talk about it. So I'm going to open the schematic here. And also, I don't know if you notice on that first screen, there is a multiplayer version of this, a 4-player called Monte Carlo. So before I scroll in to the schematic, what I want you to know is this. The game, very generally speaking, the items that are needed for startup exist at the left side of the schematic. Once the game completes the whole startup sequence and it's actually playable, the functions that exist on the right side of the schematic are like the last things that the machine would need in order to play. So your flippers, your pop bumpers, your slingshots, the chime bells, the coils that make the chimes ding, your knocker coil, if you decide that you have that enabled as well. So everything on the left side of the schematic is what needs to happen first before the game can start up and be played. If this is your first machine and you're trying to learn how to fix them, and one of the most frustrating things that can happen is the score motor continues to rotate over and over and over again, it's because it hasn't completed the startup sequence. You can jump into the schematic. I would highly, highly recommend instead that you start searching the startup sequence, that's what it's called, for your machine. So your Williams, your Bally, your Gottlieb, and you'll be able to find a list of a dozen or so things that happen in a sequential order. And you can try to find through that list where the game's getting hung up based on what's happening. So have the score reels reset to 0 yet? If they're not even budging, something before that startup sequence is likely the issue. The most common response, I would say, is that the score reels aren't resetting back to 0 because they're gummed up with junk and you got to tear them apart. I'm not going to get into that here, but the score reels need to be set back to 0. So if they're not, and you want to slide them out of the back box and you want to pull that plunger in and out of the coil to reset them back to 0 to get the score motor to stop, you can at least find that as being your solution. But those coils in those score reels need to be cleaned. So that's only a temporary fix. But what people will often do at the very beginning, if the score motor is rotating, is they're going to look at the score motor. There's one reason why the score motor would be rotating continuously if the problem is on the score motor, and that's that a switch, which is called the index switch, is not registering to tell the score motor that it's back to its home. And I will show you where that's at on the schematic also. Okay, so left side are going to be the startup items. The right side are going to be probably your more gameplay functionality. So let's zoom in just to confirm that. We're going to start on the right side just so you can see what I mean here. And then we'll break down the schematic a little bit more. So as I look up here, I'm going to scroll over. Okay, so I have my slingshots, which are right above the flippers. I have my flippers. I have my chime bells, and I have my TB, which are my thumper bumpers. I have a 10-point relay, which is a coil that has an armature on it, which is a plastic tray that has these little metal blade called leaf switches. And when that coil energizes, it'll change whatever the state is of those switches. So there's some switches that are normally open meaning they're not touching, or closed, meaning they are, okay? And so that might be a little bit confusing because when I first started, I was thinking open as like open, so current can flow through it. The door is open. And closed, meaning it was shut and things couldn't go through it. But open in the sense of the contact, it's not touching. Closed means circuitry can go through it. Okay, let's come back to this in a little bit. Something else I just wanted to note before we get back over to the schematic are these items that are on the right side and on the bottom. So if I were to zoom in here and I'm trying to find a specific problem on my machine, I'm saying, hey, my right flipper coil is not working and I don't know why. Okay, so I can say right flipper solenoid, it's on F26 in the schematic. And so I'll zoom back out for just a second. just to show you. So here's 26. If I scroll all the way to the left, this is laid out like a map, F. So I can, play a little game of battleship here. And it's going to be over here. So if you're looking for something specific, here's a good place to start rather than trying to fish through this entire schematic. Something that's also really, really important to know, and I know I may be making this sound oversimplified. When you look at a schematic and you try to find the part of the machine that is the issue, okay, let's stick with the flipper for a second. If I look at this part of the flipper and I'm saying, hey, this is the problem, rather than worrying about every other switch or wire that's in the machine, you need to isolate it down to where the problem is. So when you lift the playfield of this or you open up that back box for the first time, it can be extremely overwhelming. But more often than not, there's only maybe 2, 3, 4 things that it could possibly be. And so you need to find those things within the machine without worrying about everything else. Now, there could be multiple things obviously happening, but let's say my left flipper. My left flipper button, there is a switch, which in this game, the switches are actually right inside the cabinet in the button, and they're vertical and they touch. In the older Gottlieb games, there was actually it's almost like a clothes hanger, like a thick gauge wire that when you push, they physically moved this wire, which would hit switches on the playfield. The switches were actually up there. But you push that button, it closes this switch. This gap means it's normally open. It closes the switch so electricity can run through this whole wire and it can fire this coil. If we open this gap right here, this is called an end of stroke switch, what it'll actually do is drop the voltage just a touch. So that way, if you're holding or cradling the ball and holding the flipper up, it's not going to burn out your coil. So that's what the end of stroke switch is. So actually, if you have a weak fire of your coil and it just doesn't feel like it has enough oomph, typically what you would want to do is check and adjust and make sure that that end of stroke switch, which is mounted at the bottom of the playfield, picture the flippers. The flippers actually go, and there's a little arm on it that opens a switch on the actual bottom of the playfield. That's the end of stroke switch. And if you file that and you clean it with rubbing alcohol, I would never use contact cleaner, and never, ever, ever use WD-40 to lubricate anything. The only thing I use WD-40 for is if I have surface rust on my pinball legs and I spray them and I clean it with some steel wool. It's really good at that. Do not put it in your machine anywhere. Shooter rod, maybe. Nowhere else though. Okay. On the bottom down here, this machine here, or this schematic here is much nicer than some of the other ones because not only does it have the number of the wires, but it also has the color. I was actually just looking at a Bally Knight Rider schematic that does not have the letter. So in this case, this is a yellow wire. And if this wasn't here, which Knight Rider didn't, I can see the number 30, which means 3. So 3 is yellow. 0 means no tracer. A tracer is a secondary color. So if I were to find one that has, okay, so 48, okay, so GB, so it's going to be green, black, but let's say green, black wasn't there. 48, 40 is green, 8 is black. So it's mainly green with some black. These right here, also important to note, these I think will exist on most schematics. Normally open switch means that they aren't touching when it's in its like relaxed state. When it's energized, it will now close versus a normally closed switch, which means in its relaxed state or non-energized state, that switch is actually touching permanently. And when we energize it, it opens it and breaks a circuit somewhere else. We have make-break switches. So what that's going to be is picture 3 blades with one in the middle, and that blade is either touching one or it's touching the other. It's not touching both, and it's not touching neither. It's a make or break. It's touching one or the other. It'll alternate. So it's a longer blade between 2 fixed blades. And while I'm on that, as you're going through and you're trying to find switches that might be the issue, I mentioned cleaning them and sanding them with a either folded piece of sandpaper in half. I personally use a file. There's a part called a flex stone, which some people are maybe indifferent about because it can leave a chalky residue, which might cause more harm. I always would recommend cleaning them with only rubbing alcohol though. That's pretty standard. And then wait for it to dry. Rubbing alcohol dries super quickly. It removes any grease, any corrosion for the most part, and that's going to be your best bet. When you're adjusting them, they make a switch tool. You can find a switch adjustment tool on any pinball site. It looks like an Allen wrench with a little notch in it. And what you do is you can grab a blade and you can bend it. I would highly recommend getting one of those. They're only about $6 as opposed to using tweezers or needle nose pliers or anything along. It's going to be the most important tool that you have. It's only about $6. But when you're adjusting switches, so let's say that you have a switch that's not touching. You want to bend the switch that is not moving by either the score motor or by the armature in the tray itself. You're going to adjust that one so it's either making contact or not making contact, whatever it is you're trying to do, of the one that is not in the tray or not being bounced by the score motor. Okay, so we have some switches there. All the way over now to the left side of the schematic, we are going to start where the power comes in from the wall. So down here, we have our plug coming in from the wall, and this goes into the transformer. This box right here, it looks like the springs, that's your transformer. The purpose of that is to change the voltage to be whatever is appropriate for this game. This game uses 50 volts. I know that my Gottliebs have, I believe they're 25, and you can also increase the voltage by high tapping, and that'll give it about 5 more volts. I'm not sure what it'll do on this, but we have this transformer. So we have 110, 115 coming in from the wall. We have an on-off switch. This little S is a fuse, and then the fuse goes to the wire to the transformer. So this gives us full power. So if you aren't getting any power at all with your multimeter on the top of this, your issue is either the toggle switch or the fuse. It can only be one of those two things. On the other side of the transformer, or on the top of the transformer, we're going to have 4 lugs. We have one that's going to have yellow wires coming back to it. I'm going to call that the common or the return. Now, I know return might not necessarily be the right term to use because it's AC current. So it's not like it's direct current where it's flowing in return, but just for the sake of discussion with understanding a schematic, let's just say that the electricity flows around the outside of the schematic edges and it comes back down this wire down the middle. So I'm going to call it the return or the common. We have 50 volts, which everything above this line right here is going to be running on 50 volts. And that is only going to be things that move. So your coils, your solenoids, which are going to be things such as your flippers or your pop bumpers or your slingshots or kicker holes or anything that moves is going to be running on 50 volts. 6 volts are going to be powering all of the lights in this game. So if I were to, let's start with the lights first, and then we'll go up top and I'll talk about high tapping. Hope I remember that because that's an important thing to discuss so you're aware of what it is. So we have 6 volts, and it looks like we have a break right here. So there's no circuit going through this until we turn on the game. But this is called a lock relay, and a lock relay at the very top will energize when you flip the switch. And when it energizes, what it means is these gaps now become closed and electricity can flow through them. So when you turn on your machine, excuse me, a Bally or a Williams, and it'll, you hear like a metal click, it's going to be your lock relay more often than not. So now that this is closed, we have electricity that can flow through this 15 amp fuse. We have a 10 amp fuse, and it's going to split. This is going to split into the back box. And then this one right here going across the bottom is going to go to the playfield lights. So this blue wire is going to be to the playfield lights. And we'll come back to that here in a second. Let's keep up with the back box. So these are your fuse, and then we have this ball count unit. And you can look at this, says there's up to 9 balls to play, because in this game, actually, there's a Jones plug or a jack that you can make the adjustment, that you can make it when you hit certain point values. that you can, or actually earn a special. You can either earn a free ball to continue your game, or you can earn a free credit. That is a change, a setting that you actually have the adjustment to do in this game. There also is a match unit. There are your match lights, and the match lights appear in the back box when the game is over. So look here, game is on. Okay, it's in the normal state. Game over is not tripped. I'm going to be able to see the balls to play. However, when this trips, this is a make-break switch. So when this trips, what's going to happen is now it's going to be connected to the circuit here. And so now I have my match lights. So it's not going to have both. It's either going to have my match lights or my ball count lights. And again, the match unit, if you're on a 4-player game or any game, in the last digit or 2 digits or whatever light is in the back box, you would earn a free game. That's what the purpose of the match is. So if it's on free play, it means nothing, but it's exciting to hear that knock in your machine that you earned a free game. We see these little rectangular boxes in the game, maybe in a few places. These are stepper units or wiper units. So in my game, in a Williams, in a Bally, they're going to be like these flimsy looking copper fingers. And if you're lucky, they're still labeled. But what they do is they have, let's call them rivets on the machine, that as the machine steps, it'll ratchet. A coil will engage the ratchet. A spring will pull it out and actually rotate it. So it's not fully stepping. You might need to shorten your spring. Another little fact there. As it rotates, it'll change the circuits on that unit, that certain things will happen. Okay, so I'm on ball 5. Okay, I lose my ball, a relay fires, maybe the out hole relay, I'm not sure. Whatever makes this ball count unit step down, I can find that on the schematic, and it will rotate 1 step. And now those wipers are 1 step different, and it's now touching 4th ball, 3rd ball, and so on. Okay, so these little squares are stepper units. Important to note down here at the bottom, these are in the 6-volt section, which means on that ball count unit or on that disc match unit here, this 0 to 90 is also called the match unit, there are going to be multiple fingers on it. But some of those wipers or some of those fingers control the lights, whereas other fingers on it may control something that runs 50 volts in another part of the schematic. Okay, so just to note that you might see these in multiple places, but where they live down here, it's specifically talking about the lights. And as I scroll across here, I can see that here are my trip relays. Okay, I hit a rollover switch at the top, I hit the number 1, fires this trip relay, and it'll light this one up. So this bulb is going to be the one that's lit up to start. So this would be the one that lives at the top of the machine. Okay, that's lit up. I roll it over, it now switches, and it energizes this because a trip relay, again, it triggers it for a second, it's spring loaded, and now once I hit it 1 time, this light goes out and this light comes on, which is going to be the one down below. So again, it's just functioning the lights. Okay, this switch does only that, doesn't do anything else. And oh yeah, and you can see here it actually diagrams that these are the scored lights and these are the top rollover lights. So that's exactly what that is there. You can also see here, this is going to be important for me to note as I get up top, that there's an alternating relay, which when you hit certain things, try to think of what it is, it might be a 100-pointer. There will be 2 pop bumpers that will alternate and either be 10 points or 100 points on and off as they go. And that's done by the alternating relay. But this is to control the lights in it. That's it. So there's another part of the alternating relay that's actually going to change it from being 100 to 10 as we go up. Maybe we'll find that if I remember. Okay, so the lights are at the bottom, 6 volts going through there. If you're blowing a fuse, one of these 2 fuses, the fuse bank might be bad itself, but more likely than not, you have a higher voltage getting into it, and that can be a little tricky to figure out. So as I zoom out and as I scroll up, These little curly springs here are going to be your relays. If they say RE, or they're going to be a solenoid, something that actually makes it something physically move. I mean, relays do too. They make the switch trays open and close. But when I say something move, I'm talking like a kicker, a hole kicker, or a slingshot, or your flippers, or your pop bumpers. They all have a plunger in them that'll make something fire. So in order for this to happen, what needs to take place, as does at the bottom, is the circuit needs to be complete all the way across. So if I were to look at this one here, and also important to note, I apologize for bouncing back and forth. We have this yellow line that goes down the middle. This yellow line across the very top is the exact same wire. They just did it because there's so much jammed in the space. They stacked the two layers of coils here, okay? And so we have a black wire coming out and we have a yellow wire. So anything between black and yellow, the circuit needs to be complete in order for that to happen. Let's see if we can find an easy one for you here. Okay, let's look at the out hole relay. So the out hole relay fires a kicker, and I'll find that. I think I mentioned that before. So this, on the score motor, this switch on 1B needs to be closed. It is normally closed. We need to trip this out hole switch, which is a switch when the ball lands in the hole between the flippers, is actually a physical switch that'll touch. And that will energize this coil, assuming the reset relay switch is closed, it's not resetting, and the game over trip relay is closed, normally closed. Okay, so it's not game over and it's not resetting. I drop it in, it should fire. On your score motor, this might be a tricky thing to find if you're having trouble with something and you think it's on the score motor. On this game here, and on a lot of Bally's and Williams, it's a long set of wheels, and there's switch stacks that bounce on top of it. Those will open and close in the notches as the score motor rotates. And if you wanted to find this specific switch, that's right here. On this one here, on the Bally and Williams, they're numbered vertically, 1 through, let's say there's 15 wheels. And then they're lettered A at the bottom, closest to the wheel or the cog, and A, B, C, D, all the way up. So this is on the first stack, it's the second switch. And if I'm not 100% sure and I want to make sure of it, I know that that is the yellow, red, black switch. It's going to be that one right there, okay? So the out hole relay, that's what makes the out hole relay fire. The relay are the set of switches, not the actual kicker. So as I scroll across here, let's find that kicker. So my ball's not kicking out. Let's find, maybe I hopefully didn't go too far. As I'm scrolling, I see it right there. Out hole kicker solenoid. And look here, it is a switch on the out hole relay. So if you hit the out hole relay down in the cabinet, it should automatically fire that through a switch that is brown, red, and red, black. And that is only the case if the 7A is touching on the score motor also, okay? So out hole relay is the set of switches. There's one switch on that relay though, which is gonna be brown, red, and red, black, that when it touches, it fires this kicker. So without going into a whole lot extra detail here, oh, let me pause for a second. I mentioned I want to talk about the alternating relay. That was the thing down at the bottom that is either engage or disengage, and that makes my pop bumpers either be 10 or 100. I forgot I wanted to mention that. That's right here. So check this out. What's happening is there's two sets of switches in there, and these are make breaks also. So when the game starts up, it looks like we have the left thumper bumper, and that is connected to, we're jumping this wire here, the 10-point relay. So the left one is worth 10 points. The right one is lit up, and that one is, Let's jump across here, in this intersection worth 100 points. So that alternating relay, as it bounces back and forth, it's opening this set of switches or closing, and opening and closing this set of switches to make that functionality happen back and forth. So that's pretty neat. If I wanted to see what makes the alternating relay fire, I could also find the alternating relay on here and figure out what it is that actually makes that thing swap back and forth. Let's see if I can find that very quickly here. Maybe I already missed it. There it is right here. Okay, and it's actually done through the match unit. So this is the 090, the disk unit. So if I wanted to do that, I could find what makes the 0 to 90 step up. And it's right here. I can see it right here. So in fact, the 10-point relay, anything that makes the 10-point relay, this is a little bit of a maze here, 10-point relay makes that match unit, the 10 to 90 unit, rotate. As that rotates, it energizes or breaks the circuit to the alternating relay, which then turns those thumper bumpers on and off. So that's kind of neat. So what makes 10-point relay fire? Let's go over it. Let's see all the things that will make that thing alternate by ratcheting the, here we go, here's 10-point. So there's a couple things. Hitting the pop bumper that is associated with the 10-point relay will also trigger the other one to light up. Interesting. As well as the slingshots, the side rebounds, and the top rebounds. So rebounds are just switches that exist behind a rubber band. They don't fire like the slingshots would. So that's a fun little thing there to discover. So I hope that this was helpful. That's probably all I'm going to talk about here with the intro. One thing to note too is that we have some arrows. And so what these arrows mean, this took me a minute to, or actually a little bit longer than a minute. When I first started reading schematic, I was like, what are these arrows for? What this is telling you is that it wants you to jump to a different part of the schematic, that this is wired in. So if I were to look here, and I'm not going to take the time to find this one here, but this wire down here at the bottom, okay? So we have our wire, it's white-black, and it's 58-2. We can see it's 58-2. It's the exact same wire, but it exists in F3. So if we find 58-2 in F3, let's do it. F3, let's see if we can find it. So F is right here. 3 is going to be right about here. So 58-2. So if I zoom in here, so this right here is connecting to that other wire in the other part of the diagram. So if you see an arrow, it's just jumping to a different part of the diagram. Schematics are by no means the way the game is physically laid out in the machine at all. These are just how the wire logic is taking place. Let's see if there's anything else to discuss. We have the score motor. That might be kind of important to discuss here too. I mentioned about the score motor rotating over and over and over again. So there's a few things that can make the score motor run. As I see the score motor, you can see a whole bunch of things that are tied into it here. So all of these things, you know, that aren't, so as we jump over all of these items over here can, but just very generally speaking, if the coin relay gets triggered, the score motor will run. If the reset relay, score motor will run. Out hole relay. Holes, the odds hole, evens hole, 5,000. And the reason that that's the case, which is kind of interesting. So if the score motor rotates one, I don't want to say full rotation, back to the index, like a full cycle. Gottlieb's, I believe, rotate 1/3 of a wheel is considered a cycle. But what this one will do, which is kind of interesting, so these holes are worth 5 or 5,000, and this is the 5,000 point relay. And so how these, the reason why this runs a score motor, you can't get 5,000 points on the reel just like that. What actually has to happen is your 1,000 point reel needs to click 5 times. So what's happening on here is when I click it and the score motor is rotating, it's actually holding itself. And the switches are bouncing 5 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Rack those 5,000 points or 500 points. And then when the score motor rotates back to its stationary position, a switch will break and release that so that it can count. So that's a kind of a neat little thing to take place there. So again, my name's Mike Hale. I hope that this was helpful for you in trying to understand schematics. Bally's, Williams, they look very, very similar. Gottlieb's are logically laid out the same, except the lights are up the left side. And the anything that runs 25 or the coils or solenoids, that's up the right side of the schematic, and they can, you know, come down the middle. But they all logically function the same way. When you look at inside of a Williams or a Bally machine, the switches are a little bit more accessible, I would say, because the blades are vertical. So if you need to adjust them or clean them, you can stick your adjusting tool down inside, whereas the Gottlieb's, you need to undo a cotter pin a lot of times and get in there and mess with the sides of it down in a small little space because there's not a whole lot of wire. So that can be a little frustrating. But if you have any questions at all on this video, if you want to look me up on Facebook, I will try my best to help you troubleshoot some schematic things. And hopefully this video doesn't blow up to the point where I'm extremely busy trying to troubleshoot, because I'm really trying to hopefully enable you to do a little bit of troubleshooting yourself. I know that when I learned how to read a schematic, that really helped me understand so much more about troubleshooting a game. And lastly, I leave you with, it can be absolutely frustrating when you get a non-working machine and troubleshooting it. And once you get past getting that score motor, you get through the startup sequence, everything else is isolated. So try not to shotgun troubleshoot things and poke around in areas that aren't related. Try to find on the schematic exactly where it is. And because you can be doing more harm than good sometimes. So I hope you have a great day. I hope this was helpful for you. And yeah, if you have any questions or want to give any kudos or add me on Facebook, my name on Facebook is Mike Randy Hale. Randy is my father. We started this journey together. I bought him his first pinball machine called North Star. It was his favorite machine when he was a kid, and I picked it up for him for his 63rd birthday. And then the madness began. And so I'm hooked on pinballs. I'm passionate about it. I am passionate about helping other people too. So look me up on Facebook, and I hope you guys have a great day.